Yes. Welcome once again to the Earth Mystery Show. I'm Haines Ely. I have on the line Clif. We're going to be talking a bit about what the future might hold for all of us. Clif was one of my favorite guests, one of the most popular ones we ever had on the Earth Mystery Show. The phones lit up for about an hour after we talked to him last time, so stay tuned. So, let's see if we've got Clif on the phone. Clif, are you there?
I sure am.
Good to hear from you again.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. Clif does a website called halfpasthuman.com, and on that website he's been doing since, I think, 1996 or 95? 97. He's been doing analysis of linguistic changes, and the linguistic changes that he analyzes are done by web bots, or what do you call them?
Spiders. The spider programs are the things that go out and gather the data, and then the data is brought back and eaten up by a bunch of prologue programs.
And this data is basically anticipating. It might be in your own words, a rickety time machine. It's anticipating what's going to happen in the world by the changes in language which precede those events. And that just goes to show that the whole world is a lot psychic, and that we incorporate in our language words that might have something to do with what's coming up in our future.
And totally unknown to us, yeah.
Totally unknown to us. And how do you interpret the information that you get?
Well, basically we work off of shifts in emotion that are relative to language. So if we see a spike in very emotional terms that, say, the easiest ones to find, of course, are the extremes. So we could just take the case of fear. If we saw lots of words that were directly or peripherally associated with fear, then we say to ourselves, basically, aha, something scary is out there and heading our way. Make sense?
Makes sense to me. And what made you think of this? I mean, how did you come up with the idea of language precedes events?
I actually sort of noticed a bunch of stuff relative to language and how humans use language. Really, you can think of it as a couple of different ways. Artists use lies to reveal or deliver the truth, but politicians use lies to obscure the truth. And so they're both using falsehoods, which are structured language relative to what they're trying to obscure, but the very language they use to obscure it actually reveals it. It just is it's a curious feature of how humans attempt to communicate, that our language actually, to a certain extent, is not under our control. We think we're choosing our words carefully. As a matter of fact, there's prompters, if you will, from the subconscious that introduce words at weird times relative to the situation at hand. So we're all familiar with the concept of the Freudian slip. And why that occurs, we can leave aside, but we know that it does occur, and it occurs on a mass scale, and it's frequently occurring at levels that are beyond our perception, but if aggregated, provide us with a very large view of if you will, the whole populace having a Freudian slip about something that's coming up, something in essence that we know to be true. That was really the underlying premise of Freud's notice of how language sometimes trips us up. And, of course, cops use this, interrogators, interviewers even, and people come on in and they use language in certain ways, not understanding just exactly how much is being revealed by what they're saying, or more specifically by why a particular word is chosen that means the same, to fit a slot, but it may mean the same as, say, 13 or 14 or 30 or 40 other words. And so you kind of wonder, why use that word at this time? And some words have forward-looking bias to them. And I just started noticing this stuff in the late 80s, just in casual conversation around me. And then in the 90s, when I was able to start aggregating vast quantities of data that wasn't necessarily numbers. I came up through the telephone industry, so mainly I dealt with, large numbers, telephone bills, this kind of thing. And once I started processing language at the same level, I started becoming aware of very diverse patterns that were showing up and wondered, okay, this is curious, it's consistent, now why?
The NSA monitors email traffic and phone traffic looking for, I suppose, terrorists or plots. Are they using algorithms similar to yours?
Yeah, they're probably using something quite different, because their approach is they care about who says what to whom, and I don't. I don't really care who is saying anything. What I care about is, in general, is which words are being leaked out now. And as an example, we can take two people online talking about a car theft, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can say, George says to his son, my old lady jacked my ride. And so that's one way of saying that his ex-wife stole his car.
Mm-hmm.
And he could quite easily have come out and said, my ex-wife stole my car. Or he could say, a bunch of swear words, your mother stole my car. And each of those ways of stating that simple premise that his ex-wife stole his car, in his opinion, reveal a certain amount about what's going on. So he says, for instance, in the first case, he's using slang. Well, slang has an immediacy value that provides high impact emotionally, but it trails off fairly rapidly. Now, if he had said, my ex-wife used an attorney, and he starts throwing in legal terms to repossess my car or to, take my car, I can't think of the word at the moment, in part of a divorce settlement, well, legal language has necessarily a low emotional impact at the moment, but a long duration. So it's like the opposite of slang. And so we just kind of like stick a range out there with slang on one end and legal language on the other, slot all the words in between, and start making guesses as to which kinds of language lead towards more of a archetype view or of the future. And that's something else I discovered, was that within the patterns that were flowing through the language that was appearing on the net, people had a tendency to cluster at certain times language into what I referred to as archetypical themes. So there's no real reason why people on a dog forum or a garden forum or bread baking should sit there and discuss things like their family. But you'll notice, if you just sort of pay attention to those fora that you do go to, that you'll see that certain themes seem to waft and wane through the general conversation as people drift off topic.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the drifting off topic part that really got me interested. I started collecting all of those with my software. Now, getting back to the other approach to it, the NSA cares about specific words, and they're looking for specific context and words and even duplicitous language around those, again, Freudian slip kind of things, and then they attempt to form networks and find out, who the bad guys are in their opinion and so on. In my approach, it's entirely the other way. It's like the individuals don't really matter. What matters is the aggregation of the language as a whole.
And your data sets are constructed on a sidereal lunar month. How did that happen?
It turns out that there is a small level of differentiation or differential flow in these patterns. That if you were to just sit there and use the spiders the way we do and then bring back all of the data, you'll actually see an ebb and flow very much like a tidal kind of an effect, only instead of occurring twice a day, it occurs approximately twice a month. Only I noticed it was not a solar month. It didn't really line up with the calendar, but it was very, very, very regular. And so it settles between 28 and 29.25 days. And I actually think it's related to the solar cycle of the internal spin at 28 days of the, I think they call it the second median sphere inside the sun. There's actually 3 levels of rotation in the sun, and one of them is precisely at 28 days, and it very closely matches what we see in our data. And it was just a pattern that was emergent.
I'm just going to go through some of these things so the listeners know what we're talking about. What's a metadata layer? A
metadata layer is where we collect conversations about all different kinds of stuff, and for whatever reason, let's take the archetype of a family. Family is an archetype that is constant across cultures. Somebody in the Amazon knows it, somebody in Russia, somebody in California. We all know what a family is. So you're sitting there in your fora and you're talking about your dogs or your plants or whatever, and psychically we get a discussion of the family as we drift off topic. What we would call a metadata layer is if on the same time frame we got that same archetype of a family showing up not only in garden fora but also in bread baking fora and gardening and all these others, all pretty much at the same time. That makes sense?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, we're all drifting off in our topics into the same direction at the same time in diverse places, and we see these same archetypes across these many diverse places.
And that's what you call going vertical?
No, that's a metadata layer. Going vertical is where it's really a computer term. That's where we have data that is ramping up on a J curve, on an exponential curve up. So, for instance, in January we see 5 or 6 references to firecrackers, and the references to firecrackers and fireworks builds up, and then around May or so, it's no longer at this little 30% 98% grade or whatever, it reaches the bottom of the J curve and then heads vertical as we approach July 4th. Make sense?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So you have a bunch of different categories that you've made up for the layer labels, I guess, as you call them.
Yeah.
And some of these are restrictions on movement, encounters with scarcity, secrets revealed, conflict, duality, impetus for change, restrictions on movement.
These are all very large aggregations of emotionally cohesive, off-topic driftings that form those metadata layers. So, for instance, we see a very rampant metadata layer all through 2009 for transformation. Lots and lots of words about personal transformation, finding your center. And there's also the broader scale of transforming the society, transforming the economy. Change is just out and about in the wind everywhere in all kinds of language. And so all of that lumped together forms the transformation layer.
Our guest today on the Earth Mystery Show is Clif High, and I mentioned at the beginning of the show that he has a website called Half Past Human, all one word, halfpasthuman.com, where you can log on and tune in and read all this stuff. There's also another website that you recommend, that's George Uri.
Uri, yeah.
You can log